going to take it back a stage, and things that I think you could be thinking about doing now so that you are ready to respond when the kind of situation that Richard has described happens. Clearly, two words have been mentioned that I'm going to pick up on in this conversation, two really important words: reputation and trust. And I think you would all agree that for every professional services firm, you need both of those things. Basically, they are your biggest assets. You need a strong reputation, and you need to be trusted by your stakeholders, in particular your clients and your people. And sadly, I think reputation and trust is particularly vulnerable now. And I say specifically now because I think when you are in that early firefighting phase of the crisis, in some ways, it's quite obvious what needs to be done. And so you focus on managing cash flow and those immediate things that it's very clear have to happen. And I think we are now coming out of that immediate firefighting phase. We're certainly at the end of it. And I think coming to that moment in time, many firms and many businesses of all kinds are now in a weakened state. We don't have all of our systems working quite as well as they used to work. We don't have our team near to us. We have members of staff who are still getting to grips with new ways of working from home and the technology. Our supply chains may not be working as well as we would like them to have done. So we are not operating at 100% capacity and efficiency at the moment. Therefore, we are in a weakened state. And I know you've covered this on previous sessions, but what that means is people like cyber criminals are upping their game at the moment and are actively targeting organizations because they know they are in a weakened state. The other big danger that I would encourage you to avoid, and we're seeing some good practice and some not so good practice amongst the people that we're talking with, is clearly it is important to focus on the opportunities going forward. Clearly it is important to develop the organization so it is ready to succeed in this new normal. But it's important not to just focus on the upside. Now is also a time for planning about how we protect reputation and trust, as well as how we capitalize on new opportunities. So I'd like to cover two areas briefly. How do we protect those assets of reputation and trust now? And I'd like to talk about some practical things that I think a number of our clients are thinking about, and I'd encourage you to think about too. And secondly, some cultural things that I think will help you to be ready if that situation occurs that Richard described of someone doing or saying the wrong thing. So, practical measures first of all. So, the most important thing, probably of anything that I'm going to say, is please don't go straight from firefighting the initial crisis to business as usual as it can be in this new phase without pausing. I would strongly recommend a review of what happened in that first phase and drawing the learnings out of that before immediately going back into something like business as usual. And I think there are at least two parameters to learnings. One is specifically around your crisis management response. Many of you will have had crisis management plans and teams that you activated a couple of months ago. Out of crisis comes opportunity. This is an opportunity to assess whether that plan as it was previously structured actually worked, what was good about it, what was really effective about it, and what didn't work and what was missing, and make sure that you take time now to address that, because there may be a second crisis just around the corner, sadly. And the second thing is also to take stock of how the leadership teams yourselves that have been working on this crisis, about how you feel about how you responded to that crisis, and again, just taking stock of people's energy levels and ways of working. How can we sustain this level of effort over the coming 3, 6, 12 months? What do we want to, hang on to? What's worked really well in terms of the new working structures? Where are we feeling not so comfortable with how things have been working over the last couple of months? So absolutely take stock and review your crisis management plan and how effectively it worked, and also your ways of working during this challenging period. Secondly, and it was something that Dave touched on about, the future implications, again, of how we take business forward. Do reassess your risk landscape, because I'm sure you've all done risk assessments, but what we are seeing is that the risk assessment that appeared to be, true and relatively objective 2 or 3 months ago is no longer the risk landscape that you are facing. So again, I would encourage you to reassess the risks facing your firms in the context of the external world as it now is and your firm as it now is, because there is no way that that risk landscape is going to be the same today as it was 2 months ago. So you need to be prepared for the risks as they stand now, not the risks as they look like 2 months ago. Third thing I've touched on, so I'll just say it again briefly, please do update your crisis management plans and processes now. This is a wonderful opportunity, if I can put it that way. You've had an impromptu rehearsal of your crisis management procedures. Please learn from them and make sure that you're even better prepared on the basis of what you've learned. And the fourth thing in the practical bucket is make sure that anyone who is required to enact those plans and processes are briefed on them, briefed on the changes that you will have made on the basis of those learnings. You don't want, again, to have to activate your crisis management infrastructure and people be working on the old set of processes when actually you've made some really great enhancements to them. So that's the practical things. In the last 2 or 3 minutes, I'd also like to talk about some of the cultural things. Now, again, I said at the start, and I think you'd all agree that your long-term success is based on your reputation and the trust of your stakeholders. Retaining that at the moment is as much a cultural matter as it is a practical matter, and you can have a really important influence on creating a crisis-resistant culture. And we've got about 10 characteristics of a crisis-resistant culture, but I wanted to pull out 4 of them for this session. The first one being really important, and it again plays to Richard's setup of this session. In this new virtual work of people working from home, everybody in your firm needs to know that if they spot a problem or if they cause a problem, that they need to alert the appropriate person. That requires there to be a culture, and again, it's a phrase that was used earlier on, of psychological safety, in which people are encouraged and thanked for saying, I have spotted a problem. I have clicked on something that I suspect may be a phishing email. So you need to create that culture of psychological safety in which you get to hear about issues and incidents before they have exploded into a crisis. So please do encourage everyone to flag issues up. And a small practical second point on my first point, let them know who they are supposed to tell. It sounds simple, but who are they supposed to tell if they spot a problem? Make sure that's clear. Second thing culturally, and this comes down to, integrity. The last thing you want at the moment is, an integrity-focused crisis at the moment. This is a moment when you need to make sure that you do not accommodate mavericks. Often mavericks are star performers who tend to play outside of the rules. You need everybody living by the same culture, living by the same values without rule breakers. So if you want to, particularly when people are working virtually in a disparate workforce, if you want to avoid some of those integrity-based crises, be very firm around governance, what the rules are, what the culture is, and do not allow those star performer mavericks to operate in a different way to everybody else. Third area of culture, beware the unintended consequences of incentivization. This is particularly important when a firm is in a weakened state. If, for example, people are incentivized purely on financial performance alone, it's going to be really hard for them to hit those targets at the moment. And if that's what their pay is based upon, you may get some people being very creative around how they achieve those targets. That is the last thing you want at the moment. So make sure that the way in which you're incentivizing, rewarding, and recognizing people results in the right behaviors. And the final part of the culture mix, and probably the most important part, is living and leading by example. Be a champion of a crisis-resistant culture. Be the one thanking someone who has brought a problem to your attention. Be the one who, when you run your next crisis exercise, is the first one in the room and dedicating the 3 hours to it, rather than the person who says, I'm too busy, this isn't important enough for me to be there. So, in summary, now is a very vulnerable phase of this situation, particularly for reputation and trust. Don't make it this far through the crisis only to fall victim to a second, maybe unrelated crisis over the next few months. Take those practical steps to be ready, but also make sure you're focusing on creating a crisis-resistant culture.